If your high school counselor tells you to do it this way, you should run as far away as possible and never listen to them again. I got a 36 on my ACT, and over the last 6 years, I've helped thousands of students get to their dream scores as well. In this video, I'm breaking down one of the most important things with the ACT: when you should take the test and how long you need to prepare for the test. This is something that I see families getting wrong all the time, and so often it holds their students back from getting the scores that they should be getting, and they lose out on getting into the best colleges and earning the most scholarships because of this mistake. High schools are leading families in the wrong direction, giving terrible advice about which test to take and when to take it, so we need to set the record straight. There is absolutely no reason why you should be messing up this part of the ACT prep process. This is the easiest thing that you could get right, and after watching this video, you'll have no excuse for missing out on ACT points because you took the test at the wrong time. So I've gotten a ton of questions in my direct messages on Instagram recently about when we should take the test, if I'm too early, if I'm too late, whatever it may be. And since I was getting so many questions, I figured I needed to make a full video just explaining all of this stuff from start all the way to finish. And by the way, I do respond to all questions and direct messages on Instagram, so message me there if you have something you want to talk about. So first off, there's actually a lot of confusion about this topic because a lot of schools will offer what's known as an in-school test where they take a full either SAT or an ACT or a PSAT or something like that on a given day instead of like going to their classes and doing their normal high school activities. And a lot of times this will be during the student's junior year of high school, but sometimes they administer these tests at different points in time as well. What we should know is that this is because a lot of states actually have some backroom dealings with either the ACT or the SAT, where these companies have contracted and paid the states or are getting paid from the states to exclusively have their tests given out in schools. And so importantly, here we should just ignore basically all of these in-school tests. There's no reason that we should just be influenced by what the ACT or the SAT companies are trying to get us to do. There's no reason that we should listen to our high school counselor's timeline for when we should take the test, and there's no reason that we should pick a test based off of backroom dealings with companies that just want to make the most money possible. So what you should do instead is figure out which test works for you and your student, and I actually have a full guide on the SAT versus the ACT and which one you should take, so go ahead and watch that video. It should be linked somewhere on here. Watch that video after you finish watching this one, if you're curious about these two tests. And then once you pick the right test for your situation, you also need to pick the right timeline for your situation, which is what we're covering right here. And you shouldn't just listen to what your high school just has on the schedule for when the SAT or the ACT had that deal for when they're going to give you that test. So with that background stuff out of the way, let's look at your specific situation and all the factors that you need to be looking at when you determine your best timeline. And the two biggest things that everyone has to look at are what year are you in high school and what classes do you need to take before you start studying for the ACT. So in terms of what year you are in high school, this is where high school counselors will lead us down the wrong path so many times. High school counselors will a lot of times recommend not taking the test until the spring of your junior year, which is way too late. Most people end up taking the test multiple times, and we don't want to start running into the summer before our senior year and into the fall of our senior year because we're still taking the test. And now we're running into overlapping college application process with our ACT prep. We just want to have the ACT done and over with before we really start on our college applications. And we'll get into more of the specifics on the timeline, but first we need to look at what classes we need to have finished in order to start preparing for the ACT. The most important thing here is all of our math knowledge and what math classes we need to have taken. So in order to take the ACT with the full knowledge that we need, really the only classes that we should have finished are Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Geometry. And I found that pre-calculus can actually be a little bit helpful in some certain situations, but it's actually kind of a trade-off because the further away that you get from Algebra 2, the more knowledge that you kind of forget from that Algebra 2 class. And that Algebra 2 class is kind of the most heavily tested on the ACT. So there's a balance between learning some somewhat new concepts in pre-calc that might be a little bit helpful versus forgetting a lot of those Algebra 2 concepts that are also way more helpful because they show up more frequently. So really anytime after you finish Algebra 2 is when we can be okay taking the ACT. And then the other math class that I get asked about a lot is statistics. And I think statistics is almost completely irrelevant in terms of our scheduling because most high school students don't take this class until senior year, if they take it at all, which is way too late. We just said we're not taking the ACT senior year, so we shouldn't be waiting until we take statistics in order to take the ACT. The other thing with statistics is that there are only typically like 3 or 4 questions on statistics in the entire math section. So it's not like a heavily tested concept that we really need to have a great understanding of. A lot of times we can really just brush up on a couple of small things with statistics, and it's not really that difficult to learn as long as you have a decent understanding of math. And this is just where we can just prepare for statistics questions alone without having taken a full year of statistics in the past. In terms of math, all we need to do is cover Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Geometry, which typically is done by the student's sophomore year of high school. And now let's get into reading and English, because these are both very similar. So on the English section, there's really nothing that's covered in our high school classes that will help us prepare for the English section. The English ACT section is basically entirely just grammar focused. And if we know all the grammar rules and we know how to construct sentences properly, then we will be great on the ACT English section. Unfortunately, I have not seen many high school classes that cover grammar. A lot of high school English classes just have you reading and writing papers and stuff like that, which doesn't really help out with grammar. So there's no real reason to wait for more high school English classes in order to take the ACT for the English section. Same thing with reading. On the reading section of the ACT, it's just reading comprehension, reading some long passages, and then answering questions about those passages. That's not really something that's practiced a lot in our high school English classes, except for a little bit of, now they're starting to do this in AP Lang. So if you're planning on taking AP Lang, then that might be a little bit helpful for the ACT reading section. But again, this is something that it's not very heavily covered in our high school English classes. So we shouldn't necessarily just hold off on taking the ACT or prepping for the ACT just because we haven't taken a certain high school English class yet. So these two sections, really, we can just take at any point in time without regards to where we are in high school. And then finally, we move on to the science section. And this is one of the ones with maybe the most confusion and most misunderstandings out there. So with high school science, we learn biology, chemistry, and physics. And on the ACT science section, all of these things are talked about, and maybe there might be passages that have to do with biology, physics, and chemistry, but we don't really need any knowledge from those classes in order to take the ACT science section. On the science section, there are 40 questions, and maybe 2 or 3 of them will have to do with actual science knowledge. The rest of these questions will be more about interpreting graphs and interpreting data, making sure that we can just read graphs, read data tables, and just find correct information and circle the correct answer based off of a graph. And with those 2 or 3 questions that are asking about actual science knowledge, a lot of times it's very, very rudimentary science knowledge. Like, what is the boiling point of water and what's the freezing point of water? And it's going to be in Celsius. So like 0 degrees is freezing point, 100 degrees Celsius is boiling point. They might ask you, like, on a pH scale, what's acidic and what's basic. Like 1 is an acid, 14 is a base, and maybe they ask about a unit converting from kilograms to grams or milligrams or something like that. These are all things that we could learn if we don't already know. We can just learn these very, very quickly and very easily during a quick preparation process. This is not something that we need to take a full year of chemistry or a full year of physics in order to have knowledge like this. So again, the science section is very similar to what I'd say the reading and English section are, where maybe we get a little bit of help from taking more classes in high school, but really there's no need to wait and put off that preparation into the future just because we haven't taken a certain high school science class yet. So now if we look at our high school class calendar, most students are pretty much done with all of the math classes by sophomore year. And really there's no benefit to really taking other classes for the other sections of the ACT. So really anytime after sophomore year, or really anytime after we've finished that Algebra 2, Algebra 1, and Geometry, we should be A-okay to start preparing for the ACT. Again, I think a lot of high school counselors give terrible advice here. They tell us to wait until the spring of our junior year, which is just way too late. We're running up into our college application process, and it's not something that we want to put off this far into the future, especially with us trying to take multiple tests in order to maximize our ACT score. Especially because most students benefit from taking multiple different ACTs. Because of the way that superscoring works, we can actually just focus on 2 or 3 sections of the test at one time, so we don't spread ourselves thin throughout all 4 sections of the test. So if we can just prepare for 2 or 3 sections of the test, we can do a lot better in those 2 or 3 sections for that one test. And again, because of superscoring, we can keep those 2 or 3 great scores that we just got in our back pocket, kind of lock them away in the vault and save those for later use. And then when we prepare for our second test, that's when we can focus on our 2 or 3 lowest scores. At this point, it might even just be one section that we have to focus on. If we have great scores in 3 sections, we only need to focus on 1. And again, because we can focus entirely on 1 or 2 sections, we don't have to spread ourselves too thin, and we can get a better score on that one section than we would have gotten if we were spreading ourselves across all 4 sections of the test. And that's why I think taking 2 tests, or at least planning to take 2 tests, is really beneficial, and definitely something that we don't want to just wait until spring of our junior year to start taking these tests for. So when we're looking at our calendar, we'll want to pick out 2 test dates at least that we're going to prepare for and count backwards 5 or 6 weeks from those test dates, ideally. If we can get a good 5 or 6 week process where we're focused entirely on ACT preparation and we don't have any distractions, that's what I've found works best. Of course, there's a little bit of wiggle room here. If we need to go 3 or 4 weeks because we have a lot of other commitments, then maybe we just have to dedicate a little bit more time during that prep process. If you want to spread it out a little bit more, maybe 8 or so weeks is also a good way to do it. And that way we could dedicate maybe a little bit less time per week. But what I say, right down the middle for the standard student, we should go 5 or 6 weeks out, and we should be able to dedicate about 10 hours per week towards studying and focusing on ACT activities. Again, if we're going to go 3 or 4 weeks, maybe we need to bump that up to 15 or maybe a little bit more than 15 hours per week. And if we're spreading it out through like 8 weeks, then maybe 6 to 8 hours a week of preparation there. But I think the sweet spot for most students is 5 or 6 weeks out and about 10 hours per week of dedicated prep. So when you're looking at your specific calendar, you want to look at all the things that you're doing. If you're playing sports, if you're going on vacations, if you're taking AP exams, or you have a rigorous high school schedule in the fall or something like that, these are all things you would want to pay attention to when you're looking at when to take the ACT. And obviously you would want to avoid those times so that you can take and prepare for the ACT with no distractions. So if you've got high school baseball season coming up in the spring, then maybe don't plan to take the April ACT if you know you're going to be fully in swing on baseball and you're also going to be taking your high school classes and stuff like that. Look for a time where you can find 5 or 6 weeks of dedicated ACT prep. You're not distracted by your clubs, your sports, your whatever it may be. And that's how you find one of the time slots. And then you'll basically just do that for 2 different ACTs. It could be 2 back-to-back tests. Maybe it's the June ACT and the July ACT if you have like no other commitments during the summer. Maybe it's going to be the fall ACT of your junior year, and then maybe you're going to take the rest of the time off and you're not going to take it until the spring of your junior year. Really, you just have to find 2 periods of time where you can dedicate 5 or 6 weeks, and then you pick those times and you just go all in on those 2 times. What you don't want to do is just get prescribed what to do by your high school. And so if they're just assigning everybody the SAT in the fall of their junior year, maybe if that works for you, do it. But if it doesn't work specifically with your schedule, then completely ignore that. And if your high school counselor tells you to wait until the spring of your junior year and then pick a test for yourself, then also just completely ignore that, because they're giving cookie cutter advice that doesn't apply to your specific situation. And one more thing to note here, another big mistake I see people making is signing up for an ACT or an SAT just to find out what your score is, just to see where we are. What you can do, instead of paying their fees and lining it up for their test dates at an 8 a.m. on Saturday, just get a diagnostic test. Do it for free. Find a realistic practice test that they've actually administered in the past, find the grading scale, find the answer key, and use that rather than signing up for a real test, just to see where we're starting. Okay, so now you have all the information that you need to make your decision on when to take the test, also which test you're going to take. So you just need to know which classes you're in, what year you are in high school, and all of that stuff that we just talked about. These are all very, very easy things. Now you need to open up a calendar, look at your specific schedule and what works for you specifically, and pick 2 chunks of time that work for you leading up to a test, and then take action and actually prepare for the test during these chunks of time. Now, this is what I do with all of my students. And if you want me to personally coach your student throughout the entire process, laying out a schedule, picking the times, but also finding their highest priority question types to work on, their highest priority sections to work on first for this test, and then later on for the second test, all of that stuff, if you want to just remove any doubt from your mind about whether you're doing the right stuff, then what you can do is you can reach out to me over on Instagram, message me the word boost, and that lets me know that you're interested in having me personally coach your student along the entire pathway. What we'll do is we'll come up with a plan that works for your individual situation, and we'll just remove all the stress from the ACT process. Other than that, stay tuned to the channel, both here on YouTube and over on Instagram, for more free guides on how to master the ACT, earn scholarships, get into the best colleges, and all of that good stuff. And I'll see you in the next one.